On screen, she's glamorous, confident. A nice Jewish girl from Long Island who falls for a gangster, gets swept into the copa and the fur coats and the ringside tables, then watches it all collapse. Lorraine Bracco earned an Oscar nomination playing her in 1990. The film grossed $47 million. Critics called it a masterpiece. And Karen Hill became the most famous mob wife in American culture. But here's what most people do not know. The real Karen Hill was never interviewed for that movie. She never met Bracco. She never approved the script. She never corrected the record. The woman Scorsese put on screen was a fraction, a carefully edited fraction of the woman who actually lived it. The real Karen hid guns before her wedding and thought it was sexy. She smuggled drugs into a federal prison with her children in the back seat. She flushed $60,000 in cocaine during an FBI raid. She sensed a murder trap set by Jimmy Burke and escaped with her life. She survived 10 witness protection relocations while her husband drank, dealt, and cheated his way through every single one. And then she vanished. Completely. Permanently. Deliberately. She has not spoken a single public word in over 40 years. This is the real story of Karen Friedman Hill, the woman Goodfellas could not show you. Karen was born January 16, 1946 in New York City. Her family was Jewish, middle class, and soon relocated to Lawrence, Nassau County, part of the Five Towns area on Long Island's South Shore. Her parents' names have never been made public, not in any book, any article, any court document. She protected them even from history. She had two sisters, Sandy and Adrienne, and grew up in the kind of household where education came first and Saturday nights meant dinner with the family. She graduated from local public schools around 1963, trained as a dental hygienist, and got a job in a New York dental office. The world she came from was safe, suburban, predictable. The kind of world where a girl like Karen was supposed to marry an accountant, buy a house on the island, and raise children who would do exactly the same thing. That's not what happened. In 1965, when Karen was 19, a Lucchese capo named Paul Vario pushed one of his associates, a young half-Irish, half-Sicilian hustler named Henry Hill, to go on a double date with Vario's son, Paul Jr. Karen's friend was dating Vario Jr. That was the connection. And here's the first thing the movie got wrong. The film puts Tommy DeVito on that date. In real life, it was the boss's son. They went to Villa Capra, a restaurant owned by a gangster named Frank Manzo, and by Karen's own account, the evening was a disaster. Henry stood her up for a second date. But then came the Copacabana. And Karen's own words to journalist Nicholas Pileggi tell you everything about who she was and what she wanted. She talked about dating little schmendricks, guys who were going to be accountants, taking her out for Chinese food in the mall. With Henry, she went to the Copa. Ringside table, Sammy Davis Jr. sending over champagne, people looking at her, wondering who she was. The seduction was not Henry. It was the life, the power, the way a room changed when you walked in with the right man. 4 months later, they were getting married. Karen's parents objected on 2 grounds. Henry wasn't Jewish, and his lifestyle raised every alarm a parent could have. Their condition was that he convert. Henry agreed. He underwent circumcision at what was reportedly an advanced age for the procedure. Their daughter Gina would later write that her grandmother made a little tent out of the bed sheets so Henry's sore parts would be protected. He later admitted the whole conversion was a sham. He went through the motions and nothing more. They eloped to North Carolina in August of 1965, where parental consent wasn't required. Then they came back to New York for a formal Jewish ceremony. A 19-year-old dental hygienist was now married to a Lucchese crime family associate, and the world she'd been raised in was already disappearing behind her. Henry's crew operated out of a cab stand in East New York under Paul Vario, the man the film calls Paul Cicero. The key players were Jimmy Burke, the heist mastermind who planned the Lufthansa job, and Tommy DeSimone, the volatile enforcer who killed for sport and reputation. Their operations ran the full menu, hijacking cargo from JFK Airport, extortion, loan sharking, gambling, arson for insurance money. This was the late 1960s New York organized crime scene at its peak, and the Lucchese family was one of the 5 families running the entire city. The wives had their own code, their own hierarchy. Saturday nights were for wives. Friday nights at the Copa were for the girlfriends. Karen's role was supposed to be simple: look good, spend the money, don't ask questions. And she didn't stay in that role for long. The Hills bounced through 6 residences in their first 2 years: Kew Gardens, Forest Hills, Valley Stream, Karen's parents' house in Lawrence, then the Fairview luxury high-rise in Queens overlooking Flushing Meadows Park, and then Island Park near Paul Vario's home. Henry opened a restaurant called The Suite around 1969 and used it as a front for his crew's gambling and loan sharking operations. The lifestyle markers were exactly what Karen had signed up for. Brand new Buick Riveras in the driveway, fur coats in the closet, ringside Copa tables whenever they wanted, cash always in hand, no questions about where it came from. Their son Greg was born around 1966, their daughter Gina around 1968. For a few years, the life worked. The money was flowing. The family was growing, and Karen settled into the rhythm of being a Lucchese associate's wife in the most powerful criminal underworld in the country. But the moment that defined Karen's real trajectory came early. A neighbor named Ted tried to force himself on her. Henry pistol whipped him. He didn't just hit him, he shoved the gun inside Ted's mouth and, in Henry's words, moved it around like a dinner gong. Then he handed Karen the weapon and said, "Hide this." And she did. Gina would later write about it. "Most girls would have been terrified, but my mom said she thought it was sexy." Stop and think about that. A 19-year-old girl from a Jewish family in the Five Towns chose to conceal a weapon used in a violent assault, and she liked the way it felt. That's the moment the movie glosses over. That's the moment the real Karen Hill began. From that point on, she stored illegal firearms at their home throughout the entire 1970s. She wasn't watching from the sidelines, she was an accessory from the start. Henry's affair with Linda Coposciano, the woman called Janice Rossi in the film, began around 1969. He set her up in an apartment near the Copa. Karen discovered the affair and went after Linda with everything she had: phone calls, confrontations, harassment. Meanwhile, the social world around them grew darker by the month. On Jimmy and Mickey Burke's wedding day, police discovered the dismembered remains of Mickey's ex-boyfriend in the trunk of Jimmy's car. Jimmy had murdered him. Karen described this entire social world as one that could have kept a soap opera going for years. She said that like she was talking about a neighborhood barbecue. That's how normalized violence had become in her life. In 1974, everything changed. Henry was convicted of extortion and sent to federal prison. Karen was alone with 2 young children. And here's where the mythology of organized crime falls apart. The mob's supposed code, we take care of our own, we look after the families when someone goes away, Karen called it what it was: a lie. Her words to Pileggi were bitter and specific. She'd read about how these guys take care of each other when they're in jail, but she'd never seen it in real life. If they don't have to help you, they won't. She wound up in a small, shabby apartment. No money from the crew. Her parents and sisters stepped in to keep her and the children fed, but Karen didn't just sit and wait for Henry to come home. She drove 5.5 hours through the night to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, children in the car, and smuggled drugs, alcohol, and contraband in oversized bags during visits. This wasn't a woman standing by her man. This was a woman running supply lines into a federal prison. And it gets darker. Henry's book Gangsters and Goodfellas alleges Karen had an affair with Paul Vario himself during this period. The boss. The man Henry answered to. The film hinted at it, Paulie telling Henry he knows how to talk to her, especially her. But this claim comes solely from Henry, a documented and professional liar, and it has never been confirmed by anyone. Henry also claimed that Tommy DeSimone beat and attempted to rape Karen during his incarceration, also unconfirmed. Also sourced exclusively from Henry. What is documented is simpler and more telling. Karen emerged from those 4 years harder, more capable, and more dangerous than the woman who went in. Henry was paroled on July 12, 1978. He came home to a wife who was no longer the dental hygienist from the Five Towns. And then everything accelerated. Henry's drug operation exploded after his release, with wholesale cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and quaaludes. The film compresses this into a frantic 20-minute montage scored to rock music. But the reality was worse than anything Scorsese showed. Karen wasn't on the margins. She was at the center. She personally retrieved cocaine shipments on behalf of Henry and Jimmy Burke. Their home became a packaging and distribution hub for narcotics. Karen became a heavy cocaine user herself. The parties at the house were something out of a nightmare. Guests used their daughter Gina's Miss Piggy mirror to snort cocaine. They had sex in plain sight of the children. And according to both Greg and Gina's memoir, they offered the kids a bump, their own children. On December 11, 1978, Jimmy Burke's crew pulled off the Lufthansa heist at JFK Airport, $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry. It was the biggest cash robbery in American history at the time. Then Jimmy started killing everyone connected to the score. Stax Edwards was shot in the head for failing to ditch the getaway van. Frenchie McMahon was found frozen in a refrigeration truck. Joe Buddha Manry and Robert McMahon were found in the trunk of a Buick. Parnell Stephen Edwards was killed. Angelo Sipe was killed. One by one, anyone who could talk was eliminated. The body count climbed through 1979 and into 1980. Karen watched people she knew, people she'd had dinner with, people whose wives she'd sat next to at Saturday night dinners disappear one by one. She understood exactly what was happening. She stayed anyway. Maybe she thought she was protected. Maybe she thought Henry was too valuable to kill. Maybe she just did not know how to leave. But she also did something that may have saved her life. Jimmy Burke invited Karen to come pick up some dresses from a shop in Brooklyn. She drove there. The shop was dark. The street was quiet. A woman alone, walking into a darkened building at Jimmy Burke's invitation while Burke was systematically murdering everyone who could connect him to Lufthansa. Karen sensed the trap. Something about the way the men at the entrance would not look her in the eye. She refused to go inside. She turned around and drove away. That instinct, that survival reflex honed by 15 years of living with violence, may be the reason she is alive today. April 27, 1980. Federal narcotics agents raided the Hill home in Nassau County. Detectives Daniel Mann and William Broder had spent months compiling thousands of wiretaps. In the moments before agents broke through the door, Karen grabbed the drugs and flushed approximately $60,000 worth of cocaine down the toilet. Their last cash reserve gone. Henry was arrested. Karen was arrested alongside him. The charges were trafficking cocaine and heroin from New York to Pittsburgh. Prosecutor Edward McDonald looked Karen in the eye and shut down any pretense of innocence. "Do not give me the babe in the woods routine, Karen. I have listened to those wiretaps and I have heard you on the telephone. You are talking about cocaine." Karen faced real prison time. She was never formally charged, likely covered under Henry's cooperation agreement with the government. But the wiretaps told the truth that the movie softened. Karen Hill was not a bystander. She was a participant. What happened next was the total erasure of an entire family's identity. Federal investigators played Henry surveillance tapes of Jimmy Burke telling Paul Vario they needed to have Henry killed. Henry signed the cooperation agreement on May 27, 1980. His testimony would eventually lead to approximately 50 convictions, including Vario and Burke themselves. On May 20th, U.S. Marshals drove Karen and the children home, allowed them to pack one bag each, and took them into witness protection, WITSEC. The family was relocated approximately 10 times over the following years. Each move meant a new city, new names, new schools, new lies. Omaha, Nebraska came first, summer of 1980. $1,500 a month and a rented house in a city where nobody had ever heard a Brooklyn accent. Greg recalled arriving in the Midwest with his father's jet black hair and thick Brooklyn accent and walking into a place called Godfather's Pizza. You can't make that up. They fled after Burke was overheard in court saying he knew Henry was somewhere in the Midwest. Then Independence, Kentucky, population 8,000. Henry became Martin Todd Scott. Greg became Matthew in school. Gina became a different girl with a different last name every time they moved. Henry spent his days at racetracks and his nights drinking. He couldn't stop being himself. He wrote a Sports Illustrated article in February 1981 about the Boston College point shaving scheme, infuriating the FBI, which was spending taxpayer money trying to keep him alive. He appeared on a local television show called PM Magazine wearing a fake mustache while supposedly in hiding. He even started a tourist carriage business in Cincinnati because anonymity meant nothing to Henry Hill. Then Redmond, Washington, the longest stay and the most brutal. Henry accumulated DUI after DU. He was drunk every night and high most days. Physical confrontations between Henry and teenage Greg escalated in violence until Greg finally left home at 19 after a particularly brutal fight, a fight that devastated Karen because Greg was the one stable thing in her life. Through every single move, Karen was the anchor. She adopted the new aliases. She registered the children in new schools with new names. She answered to whatever fake name the marshals gave her that month. She kept food on the table and maintained the illusion of a normal family, while her husband systematically destroyed everything around him. Greg and Gina were reportedly two of the first children ever placed in witness protection in American history. Nobody had a playbook for how to raise kids under these conditions. Greg's summary of those years is devastating. Their lives weren't falling apart, he said. They'd been vaporized, liquidated, erased. In 1981, while still legally married to Karen, Henry committed bigamy by marrying a woman named Sherry Anders in Virginia City, Nevada. In 1987, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking in federal court in Seattle and expelled from the witness security program entirely. The man who was supposed to protect this family had destroyed it from the inside over and over for 7 straight years in hiding. Karen separated from Henry around 1989. She filed for divorce in 1990, the same year Goodfellas premiered in theaters. And here's where the story splits in two. On movie screens worldwide, Lorraine Bracco was playing Karen Hill and earning an Oscar nomination for it. In real life, the actual Karen was filing for divorce, raising 2 traumatized children under false names, and trying to disappear forever. One version of Karen Hill was becoming immortal. The other was becoming invisible. The divorce dragged on for 12 years and wasn't finalized until 2002. Henry went the opposite direction. Celebrity gangster, Howard Stern appearances. He sold paintings of mob scenes. He launched a pasta sauce brand called Henry Hill's Sunday Gravy. He was arrested at least 7 more times after leaving WITSEC for drug possession, assault, and DUI. He published Gangsters and Goodfellas in 2004, making claims about Karen's affair with Vario that she couldn't publicly refute without breaking her anonymity. He fathered another son, Justin, with a woman named Dawn. He lived with his final girlfriend, Lisa Caserta, in Topanga Canyon, California. Every time Henry appeared on television telling their story his way, Karen's silence deepened. She never responded. She never corrected him. She never gave a single interview. On June 12, 2012, Henry Hill died of heart failure at West Hills Hospital in Los Angeles, one day after his 69th birthday. Caserta was at his bedside. She told reporters he went out pretty peacefully for a good fella. Karen made no public statement. The children had published their reckoning 8 years before their father died. In September 2004, Greg and Gina released On the Run, a mafia childhood, through Warner Books. With a first printing of 100,000 copies, it was co-written with journalist Sean Flynn. The book used alternating first-person perspectives with distinct fonts for each sibling's voice, one chapter from Greg's memory, the next from Gina's. It won the CWA Gold Dagger for nonfiction. Karen did not participate in writing it. She didn't contribute a single word. Greg and Gina, which are pen names and whose real birth names remain protected to this day, appeared on CBS's 60 Minutes with Charlie Rose, their faces carefully disguised. Only their spouses knew their father's true identity. Greg explained why they finally wrote it. For more than 20 years, they'd lived with Henry telling their story, with others telling their story, with Hollywood telling their story. This book was theirs, on their terms, in their voice. What they revealed about Karen was the most complicated portrait of any mob wife ever published. She was the protector, driving alone through the night to bring them to prison visits, maintaining a facade of normalcy through 10 relocations, feeding and clothing them when Henry spent every cent on drugs and gambling. But she was also the enabler. Gina's assessment cut deepest. She didn't understand the role her mother had played in everything. How if it hadn't been for her tolerating their father, always taking him back and believing his apologies, none of it ever would have happened. Maybe they never would have had to run from New York. Greg went on to attend college, then law school, and became a practicing attorney. Gina returned to New York University, completed her education, and later gained custody of half-brother Justin, flying to Florida to retrieve him from foster care when Henry and Justin's mother, Dawn, both lost parental rights. Both siblings are married with children. Both live under aliases. There have been no confirmed public statements from either since the 2004 book tour. They told the story once, then they went silent, just like their mother taught them. If you'd lived Karen Hill's life, the money, the fear, the betrayals, the 10 relocations under 10 different names, could you have stayed silent for 40 years? Let me know in the comments. Karen Hill's silence tells you something about organized crime that no movie ever could. The myth of the innocent mob wife is exactly that, a myth. Women like Karen were not decoration, they were infrastructure. She hid weapons. She smuggled contraband into a federal prison. She retrieved cocaine shipments. She flushed evidence during a raid. Without women like Karen, the operations could not function. The Lucchese family did not just need soldiers and earners. They needed wives who would keep the homes running, the children quiet, the secrets buried, and the evidence destroyed when the agents came knocking. Karen did all of it. And the loyalty that kept her in it through affairs, through violence, through prison, through witness protection, through bigamy, that loyalty was not a virtue. It was a trap. Her own daughter said it plainly. If Karen had not kept taking him back, none of it would have happened. What Goodfellas changed was the way America understood this role. Before 1990, mob wives were invisible, background characters in men's stories. Karen's voiceover narration in the film was revolutionary. For the first time, a woman's perspective inside the life was given equal weight to the men's. Bracco's Oscar nomination validated the role and the performance. But the real Karen received nothing from the film. No payment, no consultation, no credit, no royalty check. Henry reportedly received between $25,000 and $480,000 for the film rights, depending on which source you believe. Karen's legal claim to any of it was unclear at best and non-existent after the divorce. The most famous mob wife in American cinema was broke and anonymous, while the actress who played her built a career worth millions. Every mob wife character that followed, Carmela Soprano, Skylar White, the women in Narcos and Ozark, owes a debt to Bracco's portrayal. And Bracco's portrayal owes everything to a woman she deliberately chose never to meet. Karen Hill's legacy exists in 3 competing versions, and none of them are hers. There's Bracco's Karen, fierce, glamorous, ultimately sympathetic. There's Henry's Karen, alternately devoted wife and unfaithful partner, depending on what served his narrative that day. And there's the children's Karen, protector and enabler, the woman who kept them alive but whose choices put them in danger in the first place. The real Karen exists behind all 3 versions, and she's never corrected a single one of them. Everyone who told her story created their own version. Henry, Pileggi, Scorsese, Bracco, even her own children. Karen let them all do it, and she said nothing. In a world where everyone eventually talks, Karen Hill stopped talking. That might be the most remarkable thing about her entire life. As of the most recent confirmed reports, Karen Friedman Hill is alive. Henry Hill's former manager confirmed it to reporters as recently as 2023 and 2024. She would be approximately 80 years old now, living under an assumed name in an undisclosed American location. She may have remarried. She may run a business, no one knows for certain. Her children use pen names and live under aliases. Greg is a practicing attorney. Gina raised Henry's youngest son when no one else would. The whole family chose the same exit strategy, silence. Lorraine Bracco once explained why she never met the real Karen Hill. She said she thought it would be better if the creation came from her own imagination. She consulted Pileggi and prosecutor McDonald instead, and maybe that's the most honest thing anyone has ever said about this woman. Everyone created their own Karen Hill. Henry created one. Pileggi created one. Scorsese created one. Bracco created one. Even Karen's own children created one. And the real Karen, the one who hid guns at 19, smuggled drugs at 28, flushed cocaine at 34, sensed a murder trap and ran, survived a decade of witness protection, and raised 2 children. Through the worst of it, that woman has never said a single public word in over 4 decades. Not one interview, not one correction, not one defense. Somewhere in America, a woman approaching 80 lives quietly under a name that isn't hers. She's watched herself portrayed on screen by an Oscar-nominated actress. She's read her husband's lies published as truth. She's seen her children's pain printed and sold in bookstores. And she has never said a word. The most famous mob wife in American history is also the most invisible woman in it. And maybe that was the whole point.